Hello my friends, welcome back. I'm your host Indy Pride from Milk and Cookies Total War, and today the Grand Cathay unit roster has finally been unveiled in its totality. Don't know about you all, but I'm feeling colder and aloofer already. Dulles Airport, a couple miles to my east, is absolutely popping off right now, so please do forgive if you hear some jumbo jets blasting off in the background. I think they're prepping for the zombie apocalypse or something. I have no idea what's going on, but through the power of editing, you probably won't hear too much of it. Excited to walk you guys through the troop choices Cathay has on offer today. There are a few surprises here and a lot more detail about how each of these units will actually function on the battlefields of Warhammer 3, so lots to cover on that front. I am also excited to announce that Invicta and I will be working on an exclusive Units of Warhammer video for Cathay as well, spotlighting a particular unit and taking a deep dive into their lore and history with the help of Creative Assembly and Games Workshop. We'll be doing that for a multitude of other Game 3 races as well. We've already covered Skull Crushers, Wing Lancers, and Tutigan Guard, but this Cathay one is special because it's all new stuff. There's no army book or novels to draw from, so there will be a lot of new information to discuss there, and it should be a super interesting deep dive into the politicking and rivalries near the Great Bastion, as well as how this Eastern Kingdom defends its walls against the forces of chaos sweeping in from the north. So keep your eyes out for that in the coming weeks, and with that out of the way, let's take a look at the unit roster itself. And starting off, the legendary lords are of course Meow Ying, the Storm Dragon, protector of Nangao and commander of the Great Bastion, and Zhao Ming, the Iron Dragon, ruler of the western provinces closest to the Mountains of Morn and the Great Orbstone Desert. The Storm Dragon Meow Ying is a mixed lore caster of the lore of Yin, which we'll talk about in a moment, and the lore of life with a unique selection of spells from both lores, likely 3 from each, and perhaps an extra bound spell or 2 on her campaign skill tree. In battle, she can swap forms between her dragon and human body quite literally on the fly, becoming a powerful Sky Serpent with vicious lightning-based breath attacks, while her mortal persona retains all that arcane sorcery she's learned to wield over the last several thousand years. Her Disdain of Dragons ability is currently a bit light on details, but apparently all enemies who try to combat Meow Ying will find themselves at a significant disadvantage. So I could see that playing out like Marathi's Heartrender and the Dark Sword, mixed with Enchanting Beauty, debuffing enemy melee attack and defense for anyone who gets too close, or it could be more of a single target active ability like Emmerich of Calidor's Lord of Dragons taunt. Zhao Ming, the Iron Dragon, is the Yang to Storm Dragon's Ying, representing a more sociable and outgoing ruler known for creating powerful artifacts, magical items, and for his deep dives into alchemy. Like his sister, he is a mixed lore caster with spells from the lore of Yang and the lore of Metal. Something tells me he will probably have access to Final Transmutation. Turning lead into gold is kind of what alchemists are known for, and his Warding Iron special rule allows him to pass on his near invulnerable status to nearby troops for a short time, which is quite in keeping with the theme of Cathay being this defensive bulwark rather than an offensive juggernaut. So definitely an interesting juxtaposition between the two characters here, with Meow Ying being a more aggressive, attacking-focused Dragon Lord with a more defensive style of magic and the lore of life, while Zhao Ming is a tankier, more resilient dragon, focused more on ward saves and high armor values due to his alchemy, but with a more aggressive style of magic in the lore of Metal. They sound like a hell of a lot of fun to use and pretty micro-intensive as well, constantly shifting between those forms to get on the flanks of enemy units, devastate them with a breath attack, morph back to human form, cast some spells, then morph back and wreck stuff in melee. High skill cap, lots of stuff to think about, and many ways to approach combat, and I think that's all going to equal me being a very happy boy when I get to use them in Warhammer 3, so cool stuff there. Now, as we quickly read through the rest of this roster before diving into each unit in particular, let me clarify how the Harmony system of Cathay works. This will be their unique faction trait like martial or murderous prowess for the elves. When the Dragon Lords are nearby, their fervor and their presence is enough to enhance the belief of all their people to new heights, which presumably means all the buffs each Cathayan unit naturally receives from Yin and Yang will be pushed even further. All Cathayan units, every single one, ascribe to either Yin or Yang, and when close to their opposite counterpart, will get better at whatever it is they do. So melee Yang troops will become more defensive and harder to kill, while ranged Yin units will fire faster, meaning you're encouraged to turtle up and create these defensive compact formations so that all these different soldiers will synergize together and create a cohesive fighting force. Let's take a look at the rest of the roster. So for Grand Cathay Lords, we have Dragon-Blooded Shugangan Lords, that can ride a Warhorse or Jade Longma, and a Lord Magistrate that can ride a Warhorse or Sky Lantern. For Grand Cathay heroes, we have an Alchemist or an Astromancer that can ride the Wu-Xing War Compass. We'll talk about that super cool unit. Melee Infantry, Peasant Long Spearman, Jade Warriors Sword and Shield, Jade Warriors Halberd, and Celestial Dragon Guard with Halberds. For Missile Infantry, we have Peasant Archers, Iron Hail Gunner Blunderbuss, Crane Gunner Snipers, Jade Warrior Crosswoman with just the crossbow, Jade Warrior Crosswoman with the Tower Shield, and Celestial Dragon Crossbowmen. For Cav and Chariots, Peasant Horsemen, Jade Lancer Cataphracts, and Great Longbow Riders. For constructs, we naturally have the Terracotta Sentinel, and for artillery and war machines, the Sky Lantern, the Sky Junk Airship, Grand Cannon Bombard equivalent, Fire Rain Rocket, and the WuXing War Compass. Certainly a nice selection of troops there, and we'll turn our focus towards the generic Lord choices first. Now, Dragon-blooded Shugangan Lords are the masked females we've seen in concept art and the trailers, and they actually existed all the way back in 7th edition with Tamarkan, Throne of Chaos, and the Chaos Dwarf Army Book. Apparently, the noble family of the Celestial Dragon Emperor and the Moon Empress have been getting jiggy with it, as have their children, and they've boned many a man and maiden throughout the kingdom, far and wide, spreading their seed across the eastern steppes. So, they've had some kids over the last 1,000 years who became naturally gifted sorcerers, talented melee combatants, and were afforded an immense amount of prestige because of their lineage, which caused some jealousy and resentment amongst the noble population. They can wield either the lore of Yin or the lore of Yang, mounting up on ornate warhorses or Jade Longma for some flying potential, but they cannot turn into dragons due to half their parents being human. Must be something in the genetic code. So, lore of Yang focuses on buffing allies with resolute belief or disrupting enemies with walls of wind, and can unleash mighty explosions like the Dragon Emperors of old. Its spells are Jade Shield, Dragon's Breath, Wall of Wind and Fire, Stone Ground Stance, Might of Heaven and Earth, and Constellation of the Dragon. The lore of Yin, on the other hand, is a more specialized lore, with the power to reflect projectiles or summon the ghosts of the dead to assist in battle. Those who practice it can shield their allies behind mirrors and trickery. Its spells are Storm of Shadows, Cloak of Jet, Missile Mirror, which we saw in the Enter of the World of Cathay trailer, reflecting a ranged volley from the pink horrors back at the attackers, Blossom Wind, Talons of Night, and Ancestral Warriors, which are presumably the spirit summons previously mentioned. Missile Mirror honestly sounds like one of the coolest spells in the game. Being able to reflect ranged fire back at an opponent is a fantastic feature, one that I would love to see ported back to Mazda Mundi and the Bubble of Nope, and some of the previous Lords of Magic we've already seen. I cannot wait to see it in a practical battlefield scenario. Now, the other Lord choice is a Lord Magistrate. These are the expert field commanders and generals of Cathay's armies, inspiring and directing their troops with skill and efficiency. They can ride Sky Lanterns into battle, commanding their troops from above with a more strategic overhead view, and it gives them some punch from range as well. But their true strength lies in their ability to amplify harmony between each unit, vastly increasing the bonuses received when Yin and Yang elements are working in unison. For heroes, we have Alchemists, which naturally gravitate to the Iron Dragon and the city of Shangyang in the west, and unlike the casters of Yin and Yang, they operate on a somewhat darker path, creating powerful cabals of sorcery based around manipulation of potions, granting access to unique abilities and the lore of metal. They can massively buff attack values and armor, making weapons sharper and shields stronger, and that will be their main focus, taking Celestial Dragon Guard and saying, hey, here's a bunch of armor, here's a bunch more weapon strength, go beat the ever-living crap out of something. The other hero is the Astromancer, of the same coven that called down the Great Maw upon the Ogre peoples all those generations ago. They are the more widely accepted sorcerers of Grand Cathay, using the Lore of Heavens and a slew of unique abilities and special attack animations, like the Tornado and Lightning Slam Dunk combo we saw in the trailers. They can also ride the Wu-Xing War Compass, which is a war machine that allows manipulation of the elemental winds, allowing them to summon meteors and lightning storms as they charge across the battlefield. Essentially, this is an arcane artifact with the power of the Lore of Heavens, a reflection of the great compass engraved on the floor of the Celestial Court high above the capital of Wei Jin, and intricately designed as a weapon of war. So from what I can tell, it's basically a Celestial Hurricanum from the Empire, with a bunch of sorceress bound spells that cartwheels around the battlefield, blowing shit up. So while there may be some salty Empire fans here mad that Cathay is quite literally stealing their thunder, I'd honestly say this is a pretty good sign for the Empire too, because it probably means the Huracanum is in the works as well. Seems like a good blueprint for it. Peasants are peasants. I'm not going to spend much time talking about them. They can swarm the field and drown enemies in a tide of peon blood. Cathay naturally has a lot of bodies to draw from and an absolutely gigantic workforce that can be retooled in times of war, which is always, this is Warhammer. The peasant spearmen are Yar Yashigaru without the godlike overpoweredness or spear wall ability, but they can brace, they can have a pretty decent charge bonus, and they are expendable, so they'll be your frontline fodder. Apparently, the Moon Empress is all about ranged combat. She's the wife of the Celestial Dragon Emperor, and peasant grills will emulate that by training with a bow from a young age, forming ranks of low-tier archers. And peasant horsemen sound a bit like an oxymoron, because horses are expensive as hell, and in human history, they were typically reserved for nobility when it came to warfare, because the only thing more expensive than feeding a horse in antiquity is losing one. But regardless, they are a unit, actually the fastest in the roster that can't fly, and they have Vanguard, and they can harass an enemy back line, so they're crappy light cav, essentially. For the rest of the infantry, Jade Warriors are the mid-tier standing army. There are a lot of variants of them. They're the men-at-arms of Cathay, expertly trained and grouping up in tight formations of Jade and Steel. Their sword and shield and halberd variants are designed to hold the line, while the ranged firepower of Cathay cuts the enemy to bloody ribbons. I have no idea if this is a new mechanic or just flowery language from the interactions that are already in Warhammer 2, but it says when they're immobile, they adopt this kind of defensive stance that makes them harder to kill and charge, so take that for what it's worth. They have a crossbow equivalent, which trades exceptionally well into enemy missile truce because of their heavy armor, and one of those variants even comes equipped with tower shield, so they are quite a more defensive-oriented crossbow or ranged option that can survive relatively well when tied down in melee. But next up are the Celestial Dragon Guard, the elite defenders of the Emperor. They wield armor-piercing halberds with bonus versus large, and are the most well-trained troops in Cathay's arsenal, similar to Phoenix Guard or Blackguard in terms of unit design and battlefield role. And they also have a ranged equivalent, using a special repeater crossbow with armor-piercing bolts giving them a ton of offensive firepower to accompany their already impressive defensive capabilities. Super good shields, super good armor, not a true hybrid unit, but more than capable in melee all the same. Very excited to see an elite tier crossbow unit that's focused more on defense and less on mobility. Pretty interesting design. Most of the high tier archers we've seen thus far are like Way Watchers. They are very glass cannony. They'll kill you from range super hard, but they'll die pretty easily in melee. This is kind of different. They don't quite have that same maneuverability, but they still hit like a Mack truck from downtown. They just can't run away. All that is a good segue into missile infantry, which is where a lot of the killing power in this army resides. Iron Hail Gunners are a new addition we didn't know about before, using blunderbuss shotguns that can tear through armor at close range. Super cool idea there, but we've seen this unit archetype before with the Vampire Coast, and the hand cannons are pretty terrible, so I'm hoping they'll get a buff and actually see some use in Warhammer 3, because blasting entire formations apart at point-blank range, and that slowing knockback effect they naturally have, certainly has some useful applications in theory. It just hasn't translated well in practice up to this point. Opposite them are the Crane Gunners, the Giselles we've seen in screenshots operating in teams of 2, with massive range, precision, and sniping potential, will operate exactly like Warplock Giselles for the Skaven, and allow Cathay to take out high-value targets from across the battlefield. Onto the mobility side, Thine Majestic Steeds Await and Jade Lancers are the lamellar cataphracts we've seen in concept art. They are slower and heavier than standard horsemen, but are said to deal extreme damage to infantry formations on impact, but are more known for their defensive capabilities, with solid armor and good shields. Apparently far hardier, quote-unquote, than knights of a similar tier from other factions. Great Longbow Riders are the other cab option, dragon-blooded nobles who have not yet risen to become lords themselves. Their speed, the power of their charge, and the strength of their armor marks them as elite, and their dragon horse mounts cause fear as their lances slam home. I'd be curious to see how effective they actually are in Warhammer 3, because Pegasi traditionally don't have a fantastic track record when it comes to combat performance. I mean, I wouldn't say they're horrendous, but The low mass and inability to disengage, combined with their low model count and kind of smallish HP pool, can lead to some pretty unpleasant situations where a very expensive flying cav unit just gets demolished when they've charged into, like, peasants. They just get tied down and murdered. So I'll believe they're elite when I see they're elite. Until then, meh, we'll see. We've already watched them meat spin all over their opponents, styling on those Zinchi nerds, and the Terracotta Sentinel is poised to become Cathay's lone construct, though we'll hopefully see Jade Guardian Lions in future DLC. Expect we will, but they are the ultimate Cathay Doomstack unit, if Doomstacking will still exist in its current form on launch day. Just an all-around beast doing what single entities do, not much to talk about there until we know more about its stats. But the most unique part of the roster for me comes in the form of flying war machines, balloons and airships that blast apart enemy formations from the safety of the skies. The Sky Lantern utilizes a combination of crane gunners for fire support and an ever-burning Vermilion Warbird for keeping the contraption afloat. They are incredibly slow, but can harass important enemy targets from relative safety and can fire while moving, so kind of like a flying war wagon. I expect armor-piercing missiles, they'll fire powerful weapons from above, they'll do some good damage in terms of harassing and maybe taking down single entities, but they won't just outright burst a unit into oblivion. But if the Sky Lantern is a dinghy in the ocean, the Sky Junk is a glorious warship, sporting great guns that can wipe out entire battle lines. The armored carrier at its base can withstand focused missile fire and drop makeshift bombs while blasting enemies with rockets and supporting missile fire. It has terrible melee stats and is near useless once out of ammo, but will pack a serious wallop up until that point. Now onto the artillery, we have the Grand Cannon, which is indeed a variant I figured we'd get. A bombard essentially that can smash through walls or wreck monsters as a single target demolisher, and it's pulled by a team of golden oxen, meaning it's quite a bit more mobile and can reposition better than many artillery pieces in the game. So kinda subscribing to the Gustavus Adolphus school of mobile gunpowder. Fire, move to the flank, fire again. And the Fire Rain Rocket is its counterpart, the ultimate range destroyer for Cathay, exploding entire regiments and arcing over walls to devastate defenders during siege scenarios. They are good versus infantry and cavalry alike, can punch through battlements, and function quite similarly to the Hellstrom rocket battery for the Empire. Inferior range, but greatly improved firepower over the Grand Cannon, with an unusually high number of support staff due to Cathay's massive population, so a bit harder to finish off if they get tied down in melee. So what we have with this unit roster is one very much focused on defense and ranged firepower. Not a ton of infantry or cavalry options, but a big selection of crossbows, artillery, and war machines to choose from. It's quite well balanced. Most unit archetypes are present here, and that should allow them to deal with the multitude of threats on their northern and western borders, which will put an immense amount of pressure on you as you start your campaign. Overall, I think this is a nice reveal. It's a good looking roster. Quite happy with what we've seen here, and what I'm expecting is that future DLC will focus more on the fantastical and construct side of the roster, while the baseline army is relatively down to earth, or as subdued as dragon lords and magical tornado machines can possibly be. More exciting than that though, that will likely wrap up Cathay reveals until Invicta and I dive back into the Units of Warhammer series, and we'll quickly be moving on to Tzeentch and hopefully the pre-order bonus very soon. So, let me know what you guys think of the unit roster, and I will see you all in the next video. Indie Pride, signing out for now.